her advice was great, actually. She said the way you leave a relationship says more about you
Mm-hmm.
than the way you start it or the way you conduct yourself in it. And
Yeah.
so it was really important to me to leave on a good foot.
I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you, so you're with Ian for a long time, but then at
Mm.
some point you jumped ship and went solo. So
Yeah.
why did
So
you?
quite late. So I'd had a clinic probably for the past 5 or 6 years, and it was getting busier and busier. So I was splitting my time. You know, it was very proportional. I didn't just jump ship all of a sudden. I'd got divorced and wanted to make sure that I did have a constant income stream. And Erase had really loyal clients. I had a lot of reluctance and kind of guilt about, perhaps ever potentially leaving there. So I'd had this other clinic, my own clinic running, and it was a very different demographic, a different location in Melbourne. The people from sort of Malvern or South Yarra, almost never cross Nepean Highway, let alone come down towards the beach. Something bad could happen. And so it's a very separate kind of demographic. But I got busier and busier in my own clinic, and each year I would perhaps drop one day at Erase and then increase one day in my private clinic. And then COVID hit and we were shut down for a really long time. And then Melbourne locked down, it seemed like for 10 years, but I think it was, 211 days, but not counting. Yeah. And but it made me reflect on a lot of things and what was important to me. And what was working for me was being with my kids and being nearby home, being able to pick them up and spend time with them. And also just a sense of control. I wanted to control my hours. I wanted to control the kind of equipment I used. I wanted to be able to have the syringes I wanted, the saline I wanted at hand. If something wasn't ordered, it was my fault, no one else's fault. And it was a control factor, actually.
I'm totally with you there.
Yeah.
I mean, David and I used to work together. That's how we met.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I didn't do 18 years with him. I did what, 2 or 3?
Yeah, something like
and,
that.
And it's a big thing to sort of say to someone who you've worked with for a while.
Oh.
I'm going to do my own thing now, but I get
that
it.
That conversation was so hard.
But it wasn't because I wasn't I wasn't unhappy.
No.
I needed more control. I needed to be a bit more flexible, do my own thing rather than in the constraints of someone else's business. And even David didn't have control of that. It was what the chain said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you've described is not unusual, where people will start at a practice, whether it be with a plastic surgeon or in a chain clinic or part of some sort of larger business, and they work there, and then they get to a point where they decide they want to go off and do their own thing, and that's always scary because you've been under the protection of someone else. You haven't had to put any of your own money in. You haven't had to think about anything outside of the care of your own patients. And one of the factors I think potentially would be on your mind is, well, where are my patients going to come from? I don't advertise. I've sort of attracted patients through being in this practice, and it was already successful before I got there, and it's obviously been successful while I have been there. So where did those initial patients come from? Do you have
friends?
Right.
No, friends and friends of friends.
Right.
And one person told 2 people, who told 3 people, and it just built really quickly. It's slow at the beginning, but then, as it grows, I used to just do nights. 1 or 2 nights a week for a couple of hours, and it just slowly grew like that over a period of years. I think it is, slow and then an exponential thing because of word of mouth, and that's good.
Yeah,
because it allows you to kind of, you're not outlaying enormous sums of money initially because you're not needing to buy a hell of a lot of stuff. I don't have devices. I made a decision early on to keep my life simple. I'd had enough complications in life prior to this. So for me, it's about keeping things simple and honest and doing the best I can do. But really what we do doesn't take a lot. It takes products, it takes, a clean environment, it takes needles, syringes, but you don't require a huge investment, and you can gradually grow it as you go. But so people just sent people, and initially I used to try and they'd ring me or text me, and then I'd text them back, and they'd go back and forth, and then it gets, you probably know, Jake, how out of hand does that get?
Yeah,
the text
it drives you crazy. So then I had to start to automate things to make my life easier.
Yeah. And how did you sort of have that conversation with Ian, and also those boundaries between patients that had been seeing you at Arrays and then wanting to potentially come and see you at your private practice, and having that delineation? How did that work? Because that is a point of contention with
it was tricky. It was really tricky because, you know, I owe a lot to Ian. So I talked to my sister. I'd made a decision early on that when I started my own clinic, I would not discuss it with Arrays patients.
Yep.
So, and I had a website, but, you know, I wasn't advertising or anything like that. So it really, it basically was, I hadn't discussed it with any patients. At the time when I was really considering just stopping at Arrays, then I rang my sister, who has a long history in HR, and I talked to her about, you know, what is a good way to end a business relationship and maintain a relationship ongoing. And she said, well, her advice was great, actually. She said, the way you leave a relationship says more about you than the way you start it or the way you conduct yourself in it. And so it was really important to me to leave on a good foot. So I made an appointment with Ian to discuss it, and it was so hard. I was so nervous. You know, I was so worried he'd be upset, but he was absolutely fine and completely understood, and was grateful for the 18 years that we'd been together at Arrays, and you know, and just as usual, his usual lovely self, and very supportive, and you know, he understood that family obligations, you know, needed to come before business obligations, and that this was the right thing for me at the time.
Yeah,
that's really nice. We're still friends, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Well, I think this is potentially, could be a little bit ageist to say, but I think there is a little bit of a generational challenge with younger people who aren't comfortable having those face-to-face conversations, which potentially could be confrontational. They're not used to communicating.
I wasn't either.
Yeah, sure. But at least I guess you've had you know, the benefit of growing up in a slightly different era where, you know, not all communication was via Instagram or text message or WhatsApp or whatever it is that you use. And so I think that we do have a point now where I think most people are inherently good, and I think that most people want to do the right thing. But I think that there is this challenge with people not being comfortable with confrontational, and confrontation doesn't always need to be negative. Confrontation just means, you know, you're discussing something you might not be entirely comfortable with. It's outside of your comfort zone. There could be some, you know, you're not sure how it's going to go. So all these fears around not being comfortable having these conversations, I think, can sometimes lead to people doing things that are perceived to be dodgy. They don't have that conversation. They potentially lie about what their next move is. They're not comfortable being honest because they're not
used to it
in having these sorts of conversations. And I think that potentially can take something that was, you know, perfectly reasonable. You want to move on and do your own thing as an employee for many years. I know that people aren't going to be with me forever. This is potentially a stepping stone in their career. They might want to go off and do bigger and better things or try something on their own. And that's completely fine. But I do think that sometimes people run afoul when they're exiting a business, and not because they set out to do the wrong thing. It's just because they're not comfortable having these conversations. And I've found, you know, even if I'm disappointed someone's leaving, the fact that they've come to me, they've had a face-to-face conversation, they've made their intentions clear. We've got an agreed sort of exit strategy in terms of when you're going to leave, how we're going to handle patients, you know, what's acceptable, what's not. And then you can go on and have a relationship into the future. But I think it is an issue, this communication issue, I think does plague a lot of people, and it sometimes turns to relationships quite sour.
Thanks so much for watching the video. If you want to listen to the whole podcast, go to your favorite podcast app and search for Inside Aesthetics.
If you like the videos we're putting out, please consider subscribing to our channel. Give us a like, smash the bell icon so that you get notified when we put out more content.
If you'd like to support us, our Patreon link is down below, and you can also follow us on Instagram on our personal accounts.